Part of the problem lies in uncertainty over who exactly has overall responsibility for setting monetary and exchange rate policy. Traditionally, this is sat with the central bank, but according to legislation approved in 2009, this has now been moved to the now defunct Ministry of Economic Coordination. In the most recent reshuffle, it was then moved to the Ministry of Planning, but if you manage to get to talk to anyone in the Finance Ministry, they will insist that monetary policy and exchange rate policy still remains with them. So this has resulted in mixed messages from the government, further undermining confidence in the currency. Looking ahead, although moderately rising oil production and high levels of public investment will maintain high headline rates of GDP growth, it's clear that the boom years of 2005 to 2008 are over. After running substantial current account surpluses, reaching nearly 25% of GDP in 2006, the country moved into a deficit of almost 10% of GDP in 2009. We expect the current account to remain in deficit for the foreseeable future, as the flattening trade surplus is outpaced by rising imports of services for the oil and transport sectors and outflows of profits by oil companies. This will once again force the government to face up to the urgent need to diversify the economy and encourage in new foreign investors. Moving on to the political scene, there is much about Angola's political structure which would be familiar to businesses that operate in Africa. The Angolan state is heavily centralized, and following the approval of a new constitution in February this year, power has been centralized as never before in the president, José Eduardo dos Santos. Dos Santos was originally selected as a consensus candidate for the presidency back in 1979, after the death of the country's founding president, Agostinho Neto. However, over the past 30 years, he has skillfully entrenched himself in power, playing off competing factions against each other while simultaneously advancing his own interests, as well as those of his family and his closest associates. Very little is actually known about Zedu, as he is called in Angola, as his public appearances are usually brief, his speeches are unrevealing, and his foreign visits are few and far between. In fact, about the only thing we know for certain about Zedu is that he has a soft spot for Miguel Arcanjo. He was an Angolan-born footballer who played for Portugal's national team in the 1950s, is something of a national hero. It's said that Pelé said of him he was the best central defender he'd ever played against. So if you ever do manage to meet Dos Santos, mention Miguel Arcanjo. It's a very good way of bonding. Around Dos Santos sit his two closest advisors, his military and civilian chiefs of staff. The military chief of staff, General Helder Vieira Dias, who's known by his nom de guerre, Copelipa, handles the president's personal security, but is also responsible for overseeing the president's many business interests. It's been widely reported that President Dos Santos is the sixth richest man in Brazil by virtue of his investments there, and he doesn't live in Brazil. Until recently, Copelipa was also head of the Gabinete de Reconstrucção Nacional, an opaque government entity which oversaw massive infrastructure rehabilitation under loans and credits granted by the Hong Kong-based China International Fund, about which I will talk later. The other man who sits at the center of the power is the civilian chief of staff, Carlos Feijó. He has long been the President Dos Santos' legal advisor, but over the past 2 years, he has risen spectacularly to become the president's key enforcer, overseeing the implementation of policy directives from the president and becoming the main point of access to him. Below these two men sit a number of competent technocrats in finance, economy, and planning ministries, as well as the recently appointed governor of the central bank, José Massano. There are also several members of the political elite who have lost positions of power but remain influential within the government and within the party. Most notable among these is the former Deputy Prime Minister, Aguinaldo Jaime. Some of you might have seen him speak before. He kind of acts as Angola's unofficial roving ambassador around the world. However, outside this inner circle of competence, the quality of government officials is poor. This is something that has been lamented to me repeatedly by investors, businessmen, and diplomats over the years. The final piece in the jigsaw is the state oil company, Sonangol, which has been described as a state within a state. During the long years of war, Sonangol was in effect a shadow government, paying government salaries and raising international finance on the back of its oil output. Today, however, the company has ambitious plans to expand internationally. It has acquired numerous oil and gas stakes in recent years in countries as diverse as Gabon, Argentina, and Iraq, and the company has long-standing plans to list on the New York Stock Exchange. This resulting power structure in Angola is therefore centralized and cryptocratic, which is a way of saying that it is never entirely clear who exactly is making the decisions or how far individual authority stretches. This is particularly the case since the approval of the new constitution, which has made many ministers nervous about making unilateral decisions and looking over their shoulder to see what Feijó, Copelipa, or Zedu think. This makes it extremely difficult for new entrants to the Angolan market to work out who exactly they should be doing business with. The political outlook for the ruling party, the MPLA, is bright. Legislative elections are due in 2012, and the party is certain to sweep to victory, having harried or co-opted the opposition into submission. And the president's election has been abolished under the new constitution, which is modeled on South Africa's, which should enable Dos Santos to remain as president until at least 2022, should he so wish. In Angola, therefore, power is heavily centralized, but the levers of power are obscured. The government remains committed to reform, but it's highly resentful of external criticism, particularly from former colonial powers. And so to do business successfully in Angola, you have to do it on Angolan terms. Which brings me to Angola's business environment, the focus of our discussions today. No matter how you look at it or how you rejig the figures, Angola has one of the worst business operating environments in the world. The country has sat at the bottom of the EIU's regional and global rankings at 17th and 82nd, respectively, since it was first included in 2006. You can see the development of Angola. It's the bottom green line there on the chart. It's improved only marginally over the past 5 years and is still significantly worse than South Africa. This ranking in the EIU is reflected in other indices. Angola's ranked 163rd out of 183 countries in the World Bank's Doing Business report, and 154th out of 179 countries in the 2010 Index of Economic Freedom, produced by the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal. The reasons for Angola's poor showing are widespread, and they are immediately apparent to anyone trying to do business. Let's start by just getting to Angola. The visa system is complex and time-consuming, and it is often impossible for businessmen seeking to visit the country the first time to get a visa. Applying for a work visa is even more complicated and can often require a candidate first to obtain a 7-day visitor permit, which in itself is a process which can take months, and then they must apply for a work visa the moment they arrive in the country, as you cannot apply for a work visa when you are outside Angola. The government has repeatedly promised to simplify and make the system much easier, but reform has so far produced no tangible improvement. Then there's the question of getting a hotel room. Despite the construction of several new hotels for the African Cup of Nations tournament earlier this year, it is still extremely hard to get a booking in a decent hotel. Even if you manage to, it's not uncommon for guests to be informed that their room is no longer available when they arrive at their hotel, or even to be told that they have to move out halfway through their stay. I have heard this on several occasions. For those looking to stay long-term in Angola, rents in Angola are astronomical. It has regularly been rated as, for expatriates, one of the most expensive cities on earth for at least the last 10 years. Prior to the collapse in late 2008, a typical 3-bedroom flat in central Luanda cost around $8,500 a month. You could get the same in Mayfair in London if you wished. Currently, I'm told it's closer to around $5,000 a month, which is still considerable. And companies who want long lets for their employees or for their headquarters typically have to stump up 1 to 2 years' rent in advance in order to secure the properties. The business environment also suffers the legacy of 3 decades of civil war, namely the inadequate infrastructure. Now, it's important to note that there has been heavy investment in the infrastructure over the last 5 years, and there are notable improvements. Angola's hosting of the African Cup of Nations earlier this year gave an impetus to the process, and personally I can say that I think Luanda International Airport is hugely improved from previously. In fact, it's fair to say that passing through Luanda Airport is like passing through any other modern airport in the world. They really have improved the flow of people through their passports. I was astounded when I arrived, and there was no one in the diplomatic queue, and they actually ushered me into the diplomatic queue to speed up the process. I thought that was a very notable and welcome step change.